I'm going live about now. Obviously, I haven't been with you for about a week now, so I apologize for that. But we are back to a somewhat regularly scheduled program, which means that it's not going to be quite as daily as it was the week before last week, or was it last week? Oh, I've lost all track of time. But it's going to be about every 2 days or something like that. Obviously, we are now a little beyond all the heat of the iPhone 16 presentations, reviews, unboxings, camera comparisons. We will have some of that even now, today, and then, of course, down the road. There is still some camera analysis that really interests me. Today, we're going to look at two reviews that I disagreed with, to put it mildly. And of course, there's just a continued barrage of news almost of what Apple's going to introduce at the October event in 2025. So I think that will make a really, really solid block of news for all of us. Obviously, I know I will have to regain some of my viewership. I know YouTube really doesn't like it when live streamers go away like that, but alas, what do you want to do? I had to visit family. I was glad to do so, and I'm glad also to be back. Now, before we start, there's one kind of like I don't know, like a public service announcements, I guess, like for anybody watching from the United States in the path of Hurricane Helen, I guess, is that, of course, you do have access to satellite services on your iPhones going back to the iPhone 14 series. Now that a lot of cellular connectivity doesn't seem to work in regions afflicted by the hurricane, why do I pronounce it like that? I know how to pronounce hurricane, or maybe I do not. My lips don't move the way I want them to. So this is a big thing. This is a big innovation that Apple was first at to the market. I know there were some companies technically talking about it, and I know some companies have later then introduced it just in China and stuff like that. But if you really want a phone with basically global coverage for satellite emergency services, for now, that's the iPhone 14 series, iPhone 15 series, and iPhone 16 series. And of course, right now, even though Apple has promised originally that contract or your access to satellite emergency service would only last 2 years, they did prolong it. I, at this point, would kind of assume that they will either keep prolonging it indefinitely, or they will activate it whenever there is like a large-scale emergency, a flood, a hurricane, a tornado, whatever. Even like, I don't know, earthquakes, everything, I guess, to get some goodwill from the public. At least that's what I would be doing in a world where it's so easy to gain a lot of bad coverage. I think Apple should really fight for whatever goodwill they can have from their consumers. And with iOS 18, of course, you do get messaging with no cell service. So you do not just get to connect to satellite emergency services, but just satellite connectivity in general. Now, I know that companies like T-Mobile have talked about integrating with Starlink adjacent technology, I guess. So was making it sort of a mix of regular cellular connectivity to your phone and like the instant on-demand satellite stuff from the Tesla or Starlink or SpaceX. I guess SpaceX is the company that owns Starlink, but that hasn't really come to pass. So I don't want to downplay anybody else's like emergency services in that regard. I believe Google Pixel now has it too. But yeah, if you want any phone right now that is basically guaranteed to have it and basically also guaranteed to work, because we've also seen it over the last couple of years that it does definitely work, especially in the northern hemisphere. then the iPhone is your go-to choice. Let's see how Apple will deal with pricing this feature down the road. But for now, they are very, very much obviously offering it for free. And that's a very good thing, in my opinion. And to anybody afflicted by the hurricane, to any other kind of natural disaster or unnatural, please stay safe. If you're my viewer or not, doesn't matter. No matter your ethnicity or religion or whatever, please stay safe. Please take care of your loved ones and those maybe you just meet in an emergency. It can be a cruel world. Let us all stick together where we can. And I see Angelica has already joined the live chat saying she's grateful that I have time today. So am I. I just slept an hour after arriving on the train, so I should be somewhat fit, still a little tired, and yeah, she wants to see how curious I make you guys. Well, that's not my task. I expect you to already be curious, but I will then satisfy that curiosity. Yeah, so that was my intro and the public service announcement. I understand most of you probably know it, and even if you are in those areas and don't know it, just getting out your phone probably will already kind of inform you. But if you ever are in such a situation in the future and you haven't informed yourself about such services, well, now you know, right? And knowing is half the battle in that case. So then there is also, of course, the hard news. And the hard news that I actually put in the title today is an upcoming iPhone SE 4 and also a surprise, both rumors coming from Mark Gurman. And that surprise would be the iPad Air M3, M4, M2.5. It's honestly difficult to say what exactly will be the upgrade inside the new iPad Air that Mark Gurman is promising will be coming early next year. Now, early next year suggests either spring or just in general the first half. So like before WWDC, I guess, in June. With iPhone SE 4, that is not a surprise. We know that Apple wants to update the entire iPhone lineup. For one, there is, of course, the aspect of like, oh, we want a full screen design that just appeals to consumers. We want to restart some of the lower end sales, but maybe now with a product that would allow us to push SE pricing maybe to $500. Right. I know a lot of people say like they're married basically to a $400 price to the SE, but that $400 price was for the original iPhone SE that followed the iPhone 6S that was itself like $600-700. So its price gap to the rest of the iPhone range was not actually as huge. And also, we haven't had a $400 iPhone SE in a while. When they switched to 5G on the iPhone SE, they made it $30 more expensive, $429. So, in my opinion, the fact that they're moving from a 4.7-inch LCD panel or to like a 6.1-inch OLED that is basically full screen. They're moving from a 12 megapixel camera to a 48 megapixel one. Even if it is 12 megapixel and the rumors have been untrue, Apple has had some 12 megapixel cameras like that on the iPhone 13 Pro Max that are damn good, right? So there's still a lot to leverage, even if some of the component changes might not be as drastic as one might think. Of course, there's the change from Lightning to USB-C, but at least that's not that expensive for Apple. There is, of course, just a general design change to a flat design. We know that the iPhone 12 design has historically been more expensive than previous iPhones, but obviously Apple has now kind of figured that design out. There is, of course, also like the change from Touch ID to Face ID. So we are losing the home button versus all other iPhone SEs that we've ever had. And of course, there's the jump from the A15 chip to the A18 A18, probably. Again, not sure. There is actually a piece of news about the A18 that I would like to talk down the road. I'm not sure if I want to do it today. And that is, we do have die shots, so we actually know that the A18 chip in the iPhone 16 and 16 Plus is actually different silicon than the A18 Pro. So like the size difference is actually really small, but all those differences that we thought just came from binning down the chip, like maybe there's a defect in the cache, so you have the cache. Maybe there's a defect in one of the GPU cores, so you basically get rid of the GPU core. Yeah, those things are actually like designed into the die of the A18, which is smaller than the A18 Pro. Given that Apple now does this, I really have hopes for future Pro iPhone chips, because that makes me think that maybe Apple will become more aggressive. Like currently, the A18 Pro is like 105 square millimeters. I would like for that to go up to like 120 or something like that. Not quite crazy like 140. Too much silicon does have its own issues when it comes to power consumption, even like some latency issues and intercore communication and whatever. But yeah, like a little bit larger down the road would be great. And then Apple could start binning those chips individually. So maybe my suggestion in this case is, if the A18 is actually built for 5 GPU cores, maybe Apple has some defect units that would only have 4 GPU cores, and that would make sense in a regular SE, because the A18 offers plenty of GPU performance. Cutting that down by 20% will not be a huge loss, especially if they keep the cache the same, maybe even give it the same LPDDR7500 memory. So, and of course, 8 gigs of RAM, just in comparison to the 4 gigabytes on the current iPhone SE, it would just be such a big everyday life difference in like how many apps can be kept in the background. Of course, the battery itself would be like 80% larger or something like that as well. So the phone would be so much more usable in so many different ways by modern standards, that I'm honestly surprised that Apple hasn't yet released this device. And the only thing that makes me kind of understand why not is probably the danger of cannibalizing sales of some of the more premium models. But down the road, they will have to release some kind of model that actually sells around the $500 price point. For a while, Apple had like the iPhone 11 in that price range. That sold pretty well. Then they had like $400 iPhone SE at a time when like having a home button wasn't yet a complete deal breaker. A lot of people also tried to sell like maybe elderly people on DSE and said like, look, this phone isn't quite as huge. Look, this phone still has the home button that you like, right? So now that Apple is really pitching this design change for anybody coming from an old SE, it's also really time for them to give us some really, really good value. And that also, of course, depends if they really want to increase pricing, right? I think if this thing come out and it doesn't support Apple Intelligence, that is an issue. And having less than 8 gigs of RAM is an issue for Apple Intelligence. So I would hope that Apple just gives us 8 gigs of RAM, hopefully 128 gigs of storage, though I kind of see them maybe making the price a little lower than I expect. Like I expect $499. Maybe they will make it $469 or something like that, but still give you 64 gigabytes and then make you pay another $50 to get to up to 128, and at that point you're paying like 520 or something like that. Again, not huge differences, but don't forget Apple sells millions of those things, so wherever they can get even like $10-20 on top, that is basically feeding their profit margin very, very well. Yeah, so the iPhone SE 4 here, no surprise. Most rumors still point to it being a notch design, right? For a while, we had talked about it being potentially getting the dynamic island, it actually inheriting a lot of the body of the iPhone 16 or 15, no, dynamic island, yeah, 15, rather than the body of the iPhone 14. But I don't know what actually happened with many of those rumors. They aren't being either confirmed or denied. So for now, I'm taking them with a pinch of salt. I think that the differentiation with the smaller iPhone 13 style notch will still work for most people. I think it will, of course, work for Apple, where some people might just instinctively buy like an iPhone 16 or at that point later, like an iPhone 17, just because it looks better with the dynamic island. The bezels, I assume, will be thinner as well on the actual new iPhones rather than like a recycled design from the iPhone 14. So that is how I see the iPhone SE playing out. And now we have Mark Gurman saying that, well, he does actually confirm basically that it will have Apple Intelligence. With that, he confirms that it either has an A17 Pro or an A18 chip. So that is already an interesting thing. And of course, with that, he also kind of implies that it will have 8 gigs of RAM. Maybe Apple will find a way to give us less, but I'm honestly not sure. If Apple actually like skims on RAM inside the device and maybe gives you 6, and but then says, oh, but it still supports Apple Intelligence because it's a newer chip than the A16, I think that will have really negative repercussion, both from a consumer response perspective, but also what it will mean down the road to actually support a device with such a limited amount of memory for a large language model. 6 gigs of RAM is plenty on iOS in general, but when it comes to running LLMs, there is unfortunately only so much Apple can do to make theirs smaller than that of the rest. Of course, that's not the only device that Mark Gurman is prophesizing for the early 2025. The next is a new iPad Air that will have internal improvements. He did not specify details on whether that means a new chip, new modem, or something like that. It could, for example, now that Apple offers Wi-Fi 7 across the iPhone 16 and 16 Pro, maybe Apple will do the same for iPads. They will update the Pro with Wi-Fi 7 and the Air as well. That being said, there's no iPad Pro update on the horizon, so that would be a little weird. So a chip update might make most sense as an internal improvement, but I would argue, like, what chip would it get? Apple doesn't seem to like using the M3 at this point because it's built on N3B, and 3B really has shoddy supply. So Apple probably just hopes to give everything down the road an M4 chip, but even the binned M4 iPad Pro just has this huge price difference to the iPad Air. And I know it does, of course, come with the OLED screen, but really, will Apple then ask us to pay $300 more for that difference? I don't know. Like for now, I would kind of be inclined to believe that Apple might actually just still give it an M2 chip, but currently the iPad Air has like a 9-core GPU M2. Maybe Apple would just give us a fully unbinned 10-core GPU M2. And the most major thing that Apple seems to be targeting with this iPad Air is actually the accessory landscape. Now, it obviously already supports Apple Pencil Pro, but it's still bound to the old generation of Magic keyboards. Now that, of course, and which is, of course, all the more ridiculous when you consider that they are priced the same way as the new Magic Keyboard for the iPad Pro. And I think that doesn't make sense logistically. I think that confuses consumers. In my opinion, what's very likely is happening here is that the current M2 iPad Air was actually being planned on releasing for a long time, but because the M4 iPad Pro took a while to obviously develop, make, because like the OLED panel had like logistical supply questions. The M4 chip was built on the latest node, N3E, that no other device was built on before. And yeah, I think that the M2 iPad Air was like long ready by that point, but Apple still waited on releasing it so it didn't cannibalize like iPad Pro M2 sales. And now that we have this iPad Air, Apple still maybe is working on like an 18-month schedule for the upgrade. But because this iPad was maybe delayed by several months, the new iPad is actually on track, but it looks early to us because we got this iPad Air late. That's kind of how my speculation, obviously, take it with a pinch of salt, but we do know that obviously the iPad Air could have come out significantly earlier. I think the same will be true for the iPad Mini. Honestly, if Apple has some big change for the entire iPad lineup, I would expect the next iPad Mini to be probably very short-lived, as Apple strives to give us things like OLED across like the cheaper iPads as well. It might not be like tandem OLED promotion the way it is on the Pro iPads, but it would definitely still help with like efficiency, with making the display actually even thinner, so to maximize internal space or to make the device a little thinner and lighter. So yeah, a lot of things that could happen, but seems like the Magic Keyboard accessory compatibility is a big priority here, which would suggest like small redesigns basically internally with the magnets and stuff like that. Nothing that you would actually really benefit from much as somebody who maybe doesn't buy a Magic Keyboard like I don't. But definitely a much better accessory situation if iPad Air and iPad Pro keep running on basically the exact same accessories. Forgive me. Um, yeah. So that's about it for the Mark Gurman rumors. Like the newer ones, he does still recollect some of his predictions for the October event. Now he does say this year, which of course still like just because we have an October event, potentially one at the very end, that doesn't mean that we are actually like guaranteed a certain release date. We know that some of those Macs got into, and iPads for that matter, got into production a little later than others. So there is a decent chance that that some might be available, like, oh, next week, or as Apple sometimes does with Macs, it's like, oh, today, ordered later today, right? But with others, you might wait for like close to the holidays, especially maybe if early supply is limited. So Mark Gurman does still commit to a MacBook Pro release this year, an iMac release, a redesigned Mac Mini, all coming with like M4 chips. And of course, we are also rumored to get an iPad Mini and a cheaper, a new version of the cheaper base iPad. So Gurman initially said that these Macs would likely be announced during a virtual event this October, but he has been more vague about the timing lately, which again, I don't know if that means that maybe the entire event moved into November, or if he maybe believes that not every single device that we are talking about here would be announced during an October event. But yeah, Mark Gurman is hesitating a little bit. This is why I've had like a conversation recently with somebody on Twitter who said something to the degree like, oh, we know Apple is far behind Meta in their glasses prototypes because Mark Gurman said it. And I'm like, you know that Mark Gurman isn't infallible, and you know that comparing prototypes without getting context on like what price point, for example, are they targeting. Like we know that the Meta Orion glasses with like the EMG band and stuff like that, we know that it together right now costs 10K to make. Like if Apple is targeting something that even in prototype form is already way cheaper, because obviously a production ready device will be guaranteed to be cheaper because mass production will help with pricing, but also like some technologies, for example, like the AMG on the Orion stuff that you get on the band. So instead of like looking for motion data from like doing like the pinch motion on the Apple Watch, right? That band from Meta would look for like the actual nerve impulses from your brain for that movement. So in a way, it would actually be active even before you do the actual pinch. Which is cool, but maybe that tech is actually completely unviable for mass production. So I just hate it when people say, oh, Mark Gurman says Apple needs to try harder with glasses. I'm like, we have no idea if Apple even wants to make glasses given the current technical limitations of those devices. Yeah, and Relay, also long-term supporter of the channel, joining the chat. Gonna watch in 2x so you can catch up with the live. You're very welcome to do so. Yeah, I didn't start too long ago, like what, 25 minutes now? Yep, 25 minutes. You should be able to catch up here. Because we are also covering news and then we are reacting to videos, which of course with the videos, then you can maybe skip over some parts that are very intro-ish to you. Yeah, Apple last updated the MacBook Pro and iMac lines during a virtual event on October 30th last year. That was the scary fast, like Halloween event. So we are kind of like, now that Apple really seems to target almost annual releases for Apple Silicon Macs, doesn't mean that the entire lineup will be updated on one day or something like that. And definitely devices like the Mac Studio definitely would like some quicker upgrades. But Apple does seem to be on a nice pace, especially with the MacBook Pro. Obviously, the iMac didn't get an M2 release. Now it seems to be jumping from M3 to M4 right away. Maybe Apple just produced so many M4s, they don't want to have any devices in the lineup left with M3, and maybe then M5 will then become a little bit like an M2, where seemingly every device gets it and then keeps it for a very long periods of time, as we have seen with like the Mac Mini or Mac Studio. Like it's very hard to predict, right? When I say those things, those aren't actually predictions. I'm just like encouraging you to think that like, oh, whatever is happening right now isn't always indicative of like a large pattern. It might be just indicative of like the logistical situation of a single component, and Apple is like restructuring a lot of their lineup right now, but maybe the situation next year will be entirely different. So always try to think beyond just, oh my God, I am a genius. I have seen patterns in Apple. Like there is a master plan, right? It's a very popular saying in like the Apple and analyst community, or like at least the Apple YouTuber analyst community. Really don't try to buy into that. I have no idea why my TV just turned itself off, but it did for no good reason. Hope it does turn itself back off. Yeah, so we are getting all of these devices. Again, there is also rumors about the iPad mini and the cheap iPad, if you want to call it that. But those aren't explicitly mentioned. Right now, Mark Gurman does seem to be focusing on the M4 Max, which of course every Mac being announced this year will have some variant an M4 chip. The MacBook Pro obviously not only getting an M4 chip, but also an M4 Pro and an M4 Max chip to choose from between its different sizes. The redesigned Mac Mini that we have of course talked about it with like front USB-C ports and stuff like that on this channel would most likely be getting an M4 and an M4 Pro chip as different choices. The iMac very likely getting just the M4, and then of course the MacBook Air currently not being updated, but supposedly coming sometime next year. Would be interesting if Apple makes an event out of it. Sometimes they just release devices basically as a press release, but given that we have like the iPhone SE4, potentially a new iPad Air, and now an M4 MacBook Air, I wonder if that would justify Apple having a new event, maybe something small, March, April, May, all leading up to WWDC, or if maybe the MacBook Pro sells really well, for example, example, I could also see Apple withholding a new M4 MacBook Air from us for quite a little bit, and basically trying to sell us on the higher margin, higher price device in the meantime, and then release an M4 MacBook Air in June at WWDC, getting it in time ready for release for a back to school season. And then later in the year, Apple then upgrades the MacBook Pro again. And now it's once again a generation ahead of the, of course, fanless LCD MacBook Air. And then in 2026, the lineups will diverge even further because the MacBook Pro is rumored to be getting the tandem OLED display from the current iPad Pro. So maybe at that point, Apple will feel less of a need to differentiate them based on processors. But we'll come to that when the time is actually ripe. I know this is now getting into the future, like 2 years from now. But that is kind of how I expect them to broadly treat the lineup. Of course, we know no Mac Studio, no Mac Pro at this October event. Supposedly, the MacBook Air is coming in the first half of 2025, but then Mac Studio and Mac Pro might actually be off into the second half of 2025, which of course becomes a problem because if those devices are actually M4 family based, that will mean that technically there will be lower end devices launching just a few months later with a new generation of processors. I don't know. I really don't like it when Apple does it. I don't have a problem if that happens like 9 months later or something like that. But when like 3 months after you introduce, like, for example, the M2 Ultra, you then release M3 devices or something like that, that really rubs me the wrong way. I really don't want that to happen with the M4 Mac Studio, like the M4 Ultra chips, especially. Like, it would look weird, for example, when single core performance is that much higher than potentially on M5 or something like that. But this is the current basically landscape of rumors that we have for this upcoming lineup, which of course it's not just what we are getting in October, but also what we are getting throughout 2025 as we are slowly closing the saga on M4. Obviously, we just started it, but it will come to an end eventually and be in every Mac ever, basically, like in every, or at least in every Mac device that Apple currently makes. What are we missing? I guess we're missing like a simple MacBook, like a white plastic MacBook with like an M4 chip. The Xserve, like Apple's short-lived server Macs, those could also get like revived with M4. But no, what you're seeing here plus Mac Pro, that will be eventually what's happening. That being said, there's one of those Macs that I've actually talked about now for a little bit that I would love to talk a little more about because you guys know it's hard to shut me up sometimes. This is about the M4 MacBook Pro, and we have heard from Mark Gurman. So I guess this video is kind of sponsored by Mark Gurman in a way. Is that we are getting 16 gigabytes of RAM as the new base configuration on M4 Max. For years, I've speculated that Apple could upgrade their base RAM situation on Macs to 12 gigabytes because it would be like still less than 16 gigabytes and not that much more expensive than 8 gigabytes for Apple, but it would be a distinctly like good thing in the eyes of consumers. Obviously, jumping all the way to 16, well, it depends if Apple marries that with a price increase or not, would be a very, very advantageous thing, and I would just love to see how that plays out. This is the last large piece of rumors that I'm covering today, and this is coming from images on social media by Shrimp Apple Pro, a somewhat reliable source, which you wouldn't expect given the name, but they have leaked some good stuff in the past. Now, we are talking about a 14-inch MacBook Pro. We're talking about it coming with an M4 chip, 16 gigs of memory, and 512 gigs of storage. Now, there are a few things to consider. The M4 MacBook Pro, of course, does technically have 16 gigabyte configurations right now. However, like the M3 generation, but there are already some things that we can see here that are a little different. Most importantly, of course, there's the chip, which does say it's a 10-core CPU and a 10-core GPU. So there's either no binning, or if there's a binned one, then there's a cheaper one. But there is a notable change here, which is it says 3 Thunderbolt 4 USB-C ports. Now, a while ago, we actually looked at the M4 die on this channel, and we saw that it had double the I/O controllers of the M3. That, of course, is being, or M2 or M1 for that matter. And we speculated that that could mean one of two things. One, which was always the most likely, is that Apple would just give us more Thunderbolt slash USB 4 ports, or that Apple kind of combines their bandwidth and gives us Thunderbolt 5 functionality. Now, the current, of course, M3 MacBook Pro, not the one with M3 Pro or M3 Max, has 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports. So if Apple wanted to give us 3 Thunderbolt ports, they would either have to split the bandwidth between those, between one I/O controller, or they would have to go the extra route, give it a chip with more I/O controllers, and then we would have 3 full-speed Thunderbolt 4 ports, and maybe there will be some extra speed available for like HDMI, whatever, internal storage, whatever Apple wants, basically. And what's fascinating here, of course, is this the base model? Everything kind of suggests it is. Now, I obviously couldn't tell you based on this, like there is no price sticker on here, but people who are kind of familiar with how Apple structures like obviously like this covers, like they say this looks like a base model, which and by base model they don't just mean it has an M4 chip, because obviously there will be M4 Pro and M4 Max variants, but that this does seem like maybe like the $1599 version, or at least the lowest priced version. Again, I have speculated that the inclusion of 16 gigs of memory would come with $100 price increase, so that would still make it $100 cheaper than it was before to get 16 gigabytes. But if Apple prices this device still at $1599, I would be honestly surprised, because the current situation, oh my God, did Safari freak out? Oh no, I cannot. Wait, Command Tab, right? Or Command New? Okay, I hope everything still works. It for some reason closed Safari. That is not very good. Oh yeah, okay. Safari quit unexpectedly. I really should stop running beta software on my Macs. New private window. Let's go to 95 Mac. Let's find it again somewhere on the website. Oh, is iOS 18 out? Okay, iOS 18.0.1 is soon to be coming out, apparently. But it's not out yet, so I got a little confused a little bit. Where is it? There's a new version of Microsoft Office. That's great. People are praising photographic styles. That's fair. There's, of course, the Bloomberg stuff. I guess I can actually do that. Like, I think I can talk about the A18 die. But where's my M4 MacBook Pro? Again, I could go into like my reading list, but I really haven't checked it in a while. I don't want there to be anything private or stuff like that. It wouldn't be anything obscene, but it just would be private. There is a rumor that Apple is like cutting iPhone 16 orders. That rumor is like there every single year. I honestly don't care. Let me just look at. Can I just search for M4? US Mac shipments flat. Ahead of expected M4 Mac. 5 changes to expect. Alleged M4 MacBook Pro packaging. There we are. So if this Mac comes with at 1599, right, 16 gigs of memory, fully unbinned M4 chip, of course the 14-inch display that is ProMotion and mini LED. Now it might even come in space black, like the base version, which was previously reserved for like the Pro and Max chips. Like, I don't know how Apple plans to sell the MacBook Air really along that, unless they drop pricing, or they like give the or they just eliminate the 8 gigs of RAM version. Like, look at the MacBook Air right now, and no, not German, in the US pricing range, right? So it starts at 1099 with 8 gigs of memory and 256 gigs of storage. And then, of course, we famously have our $200 upgrades for 16 gigabytes for 512. You get the fully enabled M3. Like this being $100 cheaper potentially than a 16 gigabyte. Like right now, this is $300 cheaper than the 14-inch MacBook Pro with the same amount of RAM and storage, or the M3 MacBook Pro, I should be precise. Like, this would need to drop in price to like $12.99 in my opinion to make sense. Like, maybe something crazy like $13.49 or something like that. I just don't see it. It still would need to drop in price, even if the new MacBook Pro comes at 1699, but at least then it could drop to 1399. But this just looks weird in my opinion. A smaller, worse screen, smaller battery, worse speakers inside, like. And especially if Apple doesn't upgrade the chip this year, right? So you are getting a newer chip and all those improvements for $100 more. That would be the most confused lineup of Macs ever in terms of pricing. The devices themselves wouldn't even be bad, but you would really then only buy these Macs, the MacBook Air, if you can get it in like a 30% discount or something like that. Because look at the MacBook Pro as it is right now, and you will see that $15.99 starting price, but that is for 8 gigabytes and 512 gigs of storage. Apple even wants you to upgrade apparently your storage first before you upgrade your RAM. But you can still see, of course, you can upgrade memory separately. So again, $200. It looks so ridiculous. Especially since now that would also bring like the 1 terabyte model, 16 gigabytes of storage. Like, that would be at least $100 cheaper. If it's $200 cheaper, then I just see this model being super duper popular, as people maybe now with Apple Silicon also want to play some games on Macs and things like that. So yeah, I just don't see it without. So Apple either has to increase the price from this to maybe somewhere in the middle here, $16.99, or they would just have to crazy drop the price of the MacBook Air by like $200 or something like that. Maybe even 300, who knows? I don't see that happening. I see Apple maybe playing a little bit around with the configurations, but yeah, it is what it is right now. It would be very, very interesting if it just slides in and it's your $15.99 MacBook Pro. I think it would do a lot of damage at that price and value versus Strix Point laptops, now Lunar Lake laptops. So in my opinion, it's very unlikely because it would just kill a lot of Mac margins, or it is happening and Apple just wants to sell as many Macs as possible. They just said to TSMC, give us as many M4s as possible, baby. We'll find customers for that. We actually plan to like really increase our value here. Armored Core 6 rocks, also welcome. Just a supporter from like 2 weeks ago, but now already a regular. I was at work, a spider crawled over the 16 Pro Max and took a shit on it. Well, that's why it's water and dust resistance, my brother. Like, I've always thought what would happen, like in my mind, if I dropped like my iPhone into the toilet, but you know, like dirty toilet, I would be like, oh my god, that's so freaking disgusting. And granted, I'm a medical professional. I know disgusting, but I always wondered like, oh my god, just cleaning it up and then like using it later, I would always have to think about it. Spider is bad, dirty, but it's not nearly as bad as it could be. I tried to use the iPhone 16 to take a micro shot of the shit. Oh, okay, of the spider, but it jumped away. Yeah. Hey, you have a 16 Pro Max and an iPhone 16 at home? Bro, what's going on here? Leave a little super chat love here, like double barrel iPhone shooter here. Come on. And Josephat Guerrero also joining the chat. Welcome, brother, long-term supporter of the channel. Exactly. Gaming is the perfect excuse for Apple to bump the RAM and storage, when they seem hell-bent on making it happen. Exactly. And bumping it on like the MacBook Pro, like the RAM, right, would still invite Apple to bump everything on the Air, unless they want to maybe push the Air into sub $1,000 pricing. I still don't know how much sense that makes. But maybe they would want like an $899 MacBook SE at some point or something like that. I could see that being like 8 gigs of RAM or maybe 12 gigs. Who knows? How, like it depends on the logistics on what exact memory Apple buys. Yeah, and yeah, if it truly is just $15.99, it's hard to tell. Armored Core, no, you work at an Apple authorized reseller. That makes a lot of sense. I take it back. So the 16 and 16 Pro are right beside each other for customers to try. Yeah, I actually got to try my first iPhone 16. It actually was a really good argument against my iPhone 15, but that was because I was stupid. I went out with a friend to the city and I forgot to charge my iPhone overnight. So it was actually empty. So I didn't take any photos for you guys, which was very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate. I say that, but there wasn't that much different that I could capture in photos, except for, of course, the iPhone 16's new colors and new camera design, and maybe gold titanium, or excusez-moi, the desert titanium color. And I have one point that I learned from it, and granted that is very little interaction with the device that I have had thus far, and that is that I actually like the capture button. I don't think it's in a bad spot. I think it's by far from a perfect spot, but people have said the same thing about the action button, and that didn't prevent me from taking pictures with the action button for an entire year. Yeah, like I will have like a real disagreement point with a lot of reviewers that will be later reacting today, who have really shed, kind of like the spider did on the iPhone, on the capture button. So that is the pricing considerations for the MacBook Pro. Of course, all the configuration considerations that you have to think about. This is why I'm trying to tell you right now, don't buy a MacBook Air or MacBook Pro. See what the new ones do to the pricing ladder, to the available configurations. We have more people watching now. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for not deserting me despite my week of absence. So if you're watching this, you haven't subscribed yet, if you haven't liked yet, if you haven't commented yet, if you haven't shared out the video yet, please consider doing all of that. And if you're watching this and you want to support this channel directly, do like Angelica and Max Maximus, who are MarkCheck Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube, or you can send a super chat or a super sticker or become a supporter over on Patreon. Armored Core saying, I swear people keep telling me they want desert. I don't. I think there's the beauty in like these gold colors, but I myself, I do like the muted ones. So like the blue titanium on the 15 Pro was really like peak iPhone color to me. I just replied to them, but we ran out of ice cream powder and I stare at them. Nice. Nice. I hope it's worth losing a customer to make that joke. I mean, you wouldn't lose me. I love humor, but I know some people are really a stick in the mud for sometimes. Yeah, but great to have like an Apple authorized reseller here. Hey, who maybe they want to sponsor me at some point. Like some nice family here. Jesus Christ, I'm so ashamed of what I just did. Yes. So, in one piece of extra news that was the result of me firing up Safari again after it crashed, because all hail the latest beta of macOS Sequoia. There isn't that much that I can honestly tell you about it. I've already kind of outlined it, but the A18 and A18 Pro, we now know pretty much officially, except for that it's not from an official / Apple source, but it is an image, which of course goes beyond speculation and rumors, that A18 and A18 Pro are two different dies. They're not actually that far, like, different in size or capability. We've, of course, seen them perform pretty similarly in benchmarks, even. Of course, we do know that from a hard difference, there is a different GPU like layout with one fewer GPU cores inside the A18 than the A18 Pro. This does come from Chipwise, which I haven't heard of them yet. I hear they also do like die shots in general, which probably means I should have come across them over the years, but seemingly only now do I actually hear their names. They do not share the die photo. Can I just open it in a private tab? I want to open my Twitter. Oh, it's not Twitter. It's actually their website. Wow, that looks so much better than just opening Twitter. I should always look for this. So they do have an A18 die shot. They do have the view of the A18 SoC with the die mark. And then with the Pro, they do have it basically looking a little larger here. The size difference itself, what was it? I know the A18 Pro is 105 square millimeters. Where's the size? I don't want to, and I believe then A18 was like just 90 or something like that. Actually being two entirely different chips. Does it really not have square millimeter? Or did some people like calculate it afterwards, basic, and that's not the original coverage of chipwise? That would be very fascinating. Like Command F millimeter. Yeah, like okay, so they do stack the DRAM package directly on top of the SoC die and incorporates high density RDL redistribution layers. Yep, we know that Apple has gone absolutely crazy in reducing the package size overall. Like the motherboard looks denser and denser every year. That makes it also in a way more and more difficult to cool because more components kind of overlap. But I'm just curious, why is there like, did I read that wrong? Like 18 Pro oh yeah, okay. WCCF tech. I guess they do like to cover tech in general. A die shot comparison of the A18 and A18 Pro was revealed yesterday, making the first time that Apple's second generation 3nm chipsets powering iPhone 16 models were examined, with a closer eye at least. A18 might not be based on the A18 Pro. Seems like that's very likely. And yeah, I did remember the sizes correctly. So the A18 Pro has 105 square millimeters, the A18 90. That is a very small difference to actually design a separate die for. It is. It does make the A18 Pro technically slightly larger than the A17 Pro, but that difference is so negligible, we cannot really tell if that size difference might actually be based on the fact that we expected the N3E node to have lower density than N3B. Again, here you can see them. Here, the A18 Pro overall a little larger. You can see the big difference in SLC cache. Granted, cache is lower across the board. You can see that like P-Core cache is also a lot better, larger on the A18 Pro than on the A18. So basically, in a way, A18 is in a lot of ways very similar to the concept of Zen C, right? Where it does have technically like the same cores, but because it uses so much less cache, it just is a lot more die size efficient. And then when you run it at lower clock speed, which Apple doesn't do with the A18, but what AMD does is it also becomes much more efficient because, well, it doesn't need that much cache, and then a lot of data doesn't have to travel through that cache. That technically reduces also some latency issues. Of course, you want more cache to fit more tasks into the logic of the chip itself rather than relying on memory and stuff like that. But yes, Apple apparently thinks that their main core design and stuff like that and is already so powerful that they can basically get away with having the cache. And of course, we see that the A18 Pro has a full 6-core GPU design. You can see that the A18 might have even fit probably like in a 6 GPU core. Obviously not, but yeah, you can basically see this almost being like empty space. Like this was the real design, and then this was taken out, and then this was the real design, and then the cache was just shrunk down, and like everything else kind of came in together more tightly. Just for saying, wow, I assumed the A18 was just a bin version of the A18 Pro. You and me both, brother. I cannot promise you that this is entirely correct, but I don't see why it would be incorrect in any way. So I really wanted to just bring this up. Again, there isn't that much huge insight. We know, of course, that the A18 has one fewer GPU cores. We, of course, know that it has that significantly reduced cache. But it does, while we thought that maybe, like, let's say one GPU core here was inactive, so on this design it would look the same, but basically be binned off from preventing it from working, and maybe like let's say one of those SLC caches actually has some kind of big defect. Well, now Apple would just basically delete one or delete half of each, which would be architecturally more complicated, but then would also be probably better for like just distributing cache more evenly across the entire die. Yeah, so, but that is just all so fascinating to me. I would also like to know how it, for example, impacts just like the neural engine. We don't yet have that many tasks. Of course, we do know that Apple has for example, what did I want to say with the neural engine? That they do have more memory bandwidth, like by using faster memory than the A17 Pro generation. So that helps compensate for that lower amount of cache on the A18. And what I said in the beginning of the video, and before most of you actually came online to watch, is that I would hope that the A18 Pro is a good sign for what's to come for the A19 Pro, A20 Pro, etc. Because now that we have Apple designing extra dies, I would love to see this die become larger, because it's obviously now only designed for the Pro models. It will generate more profit in general, while this, in a way, can even become smaller if Apple chooses so. And for example, now Apple could be binning those chips differently across models. My speculation is if we get an iPhone SE 4 based on this A18 chip, I could see Apple saying, oh, you know, one of these GPU cores isn't working on the die. Let's get rid of it. It's still a plenty fast chip. That's okay. And maybe down the road, Apple gives like the A19 or A20 Pro like 8 GPU cores. So then we could see like full 8 GPU cores on the Pro Max / Ultra, and then one fewer GPU core which would still be more GPU cores than on the regular model on the regular Pro, right? I think this really means a lot of good things for the future. But for now, this just looks like Apple said, what have we done with like the A15, right? Where we bint like one GPU core. And how can we do that while also further maximizing die space with a separate die, right? So they just said, okay, let's do that exact same thing. Let's get rid of one GPU core now physically, not just through binning. And because we do target like maybe in general lower power consumption here, and of course we aren't putting into like enthusiast class products, let's just cut on the cache. And that also, like, when people were like, oh, I wonder, like, one thing that I cannot really answer, and that is for some of the Pro features, right? Like, is there, for example, reason in media encoders and decoders on those dies? I haven't yet seen any like analysis on that, so I would love to keep covering that as we get more and more info down the road. But we of course know that like ProRes recording like is the difference between Pro models and non-Pro models. But would that actually result that maybe Apple potentially cuts ProRes from A18 because you still would want it to like play back ProRes? So, but that's obviously encoding versus decoding. So maybe they just get rid of one portion of that. It would be crazy to just know the exact thoughts that went into what should we cut, what shouldn't we cut, what is actually worth cutting because it actually consumes a considerable amount of die space, and what isn't because it's so small. Obviously, like for example, with the NPU, they just kept all the 16 cores. Which is interesting. They do only have 8 from 0 to 7 here, but I assume that means that each one is like 2. They didn't decide to give you like one less or something like that on each side. They gave you the full NPU. They could have easily said like, look, the A18 Pro actually has faster NPU compute than the A18, and they could have actually justified it on a real like die basis, but they didn't. So to analyze Apple's priorities here is actually very fascinating, and I would love to keep that covering down the road. Let me just look a quick find again. Decode. Nope. ProRes. Nope. So they do not provide any analysis on that. I didn't just like jump over it. It legit is not there. But it would be very interesting to see, of course, if there's any. We had some benchmarks that suggest there's a difference in encoder speeds. Whether or not that means that maybe just the lower amount of cache is hurting performance, or maybe it actually has different encoders, worse encoders, less encoders. That would be very interesting to see. Yeah, that's about it. And of course, there is there is now a real hardware difference, supposedly, in why A18 Pro can supply 10 gigabit per second to the USB-C port, while A18 is basically like like a USB 2 speed chip, and that is that there seem to be just like more PCIe lanes or something like that. Again, I cannot tell you that. I'm not an expert, but people said, look, here is more to connect. And here, like, supposedly more controllers. Couldn't tell you, just saying what some people have pointed out. So I would love to keep covering that. And if you are watching this and you have done maybe more research than I did because you weren't like completely drunk on the weekend, please let me know. I would love to hear more. Does it say, like, again, Command F, USB? Nope, still not. Yeah, so this was a very basic overview, and I've seen other people try to make conclusions based on what they see here. Obviously, some of those conclusions can be misleading, but it seems, for example, like our die analysis of the M4, where was it? M4 die shot that we've actually talked about on this channel. Where was it? M4 die shot. Is this that? And then that's DDR controllers, CPU L2 cache. Um, yeah, people said that like here it's indicative of like more storage controllers and more like display controllers and stuff like that. Again, I'm not an expert in die analysis. I repeat what I read to a degree, and sometimes I can make educated guesses by taking info that I'm actually sure about, and then extrapolating it. But here I'm really not sure. But the people who seemingly made that analysis of the M4 might have been correct, because, of course, now that we have this. MacBook Pro packaging strongly suggesting that we have more Thunderbolt 4 ports on the base model, which of course would require more controllers for that. That's all so interesting to me. I would love to see how truthful, of course, all of that analysis is. And maybe down the road, Apple could even come out in like a Johnny Cerrucci interview and say like, yeah, we found like distinct ways to save on die space. And this is how we like differentiate pro and non-pro. We do the same on the Mac. They could even say the differences on Macs are bigger because Macs, of course, are capable of having active cooling, significantly larger batteries. But on the iPhone, where there's still some difference between like the Pro iPhones, the non-Pro iPhones, we just went with relatively small differences that previously we achieved through binning, which was a little wasteful, and now we're basically achieving that with a separate die. I think that would be very, very interesting to know, and I assume that yields for this chip are basically perfect, like under 100 square millimeters. I just don't see it having basically any production issues whatsoever, which I guess does also explain how Apple can get a lot out of the new N3E Note. But that's it for today when it comes to actual news. I did want to react with you guys to some iPhone 16 reviews. Again, I don't know if I will do two or maybe just one. Depends a little bit how I want to structure the rest of my day. But I wanted to really to react to the review by John Prosser by Front Page Tech. I actually do have a lot of respect for the way he stepped up the game when it comes to production quality and basically like production impact. Like it very much rivals like MKBHD videos. In some ways, I would even say it surpasses it. But that iPhone 16 review, which is now renamed to the only iPhone 16 video you need, which was previously called like Terrible iPhone or something like that, which I believe is still like in the thumbnail or something like that. I have real problems with that review, and I want to analyze it with you guys. And then maybe tomorrow we could look at the review by Max Tech. I don't think it's that important right now. I think that he says a lot of things that are similar to what others are saying with like the capture button and stuff like that. But yeah, obviously a lot to cover here. Let's get started.
This is iPhone 16, and this year I'm choosing it over the Pro.
This to me is weird because he is not coming from a previous base model. He is coming from the iPhone 15 Pro, which in many ways is actually superior to the base 16. So if you're buying the 16, you're either getting it because you really care about individual features like faster wireless charging, Wi-Fi 7, better microphones, and not much else, and you're forgetting the benefit of a dedicated telephoto camera, a larger main lens. You're forgetting, of course, faster USB-C. You're forgetting ProMotion, obviously. So yeah, this is something that could only come from a reviewer. Nobody who has a previous generation's Pro models. Josephat, you're saying don't forget about the colors, but like no regular consumer will ever think that way. That is what, like, either you're super rich and you can like afford to make like completely baffling decisions where you change phones just for colors, like where you even downgrade in a way, or you're just a reviewer with access to all the devices you would want. So he doesn't speak for any regular consumer here. So very pretty video. I'm watching it here in 1080p. It looks really, really good in 4K, obviously. There's like no color banding
form
and stuff
factor,
like that.
perfect design, perfect color, with, unfortunately, a perfectly fatal flaw.
And by the way, if you thought that fatal flaw was promotion because in the end of that he showed you like the display, you would actually be mistaken.
The year since Pro iPhones became an option, I have purchased one. At first because
As did I. Not every single year, but I've always gone for the largest and most expensive iPhone. Not necessarily by storage configuration, though I did that with my 15 Pro Max. But before that, I had the 13 Pro Max. Before that, I had the 10s Max. Before that, I had the 7 Plus, 6s Plus, 6 Plus. And then obviously previously you didn't have that many size choices.
got more out of the phone. The Pro phone did more for me. And even while the base model
Armored
started...
Core is saying, do the displays of the Pros actually perform at 120 Hz when playing games? Depending on the game. Yeah, some games do. You don't necessarily need to hit 120 Hz to make it smoother. Some games will just run nicely between like 80 and 90, maybe 80 and 100 Hz, and you still get a nice smoothness increase over a base over 60 Hz. Josephat, I disagree. Color, smaller camera bump, lighter phone can be seen as improvements over the Pro. But would you, like personally, tell me, would you actually buy a new phone the very next year that is distinctly worse in so many ways to replace that older model? Unless, like, look, I understand. Maybe you have like a neuromuscular degenerative disease and you cannot hold up a Pro Max anymore. So you buy the base 16 that is the lightest and whatever. Yeah, that might be an argument, but don't forget the 15 Pro Max was already lighter than previously 13 Pros, 14 Pros were with their stainless steel chassis. That back camera design, yes, it looks better. I'm not denying it, but again, most of us just have cases on. You don't actually look at the cameras on the back. You look at the actual device in the front, which if you're somebody who ever said you care about promotion, would be very weird to now say, I care about the back design of the cameras more than I do than the actual smoothness of the front display.
Catch up year over year, I kept buying these, almost purely based on habit or because I had to have the best, most expensive one. This year, though, I think it's finally the year for me to think different. iPhone 16 is...
and to be honest, this is probably the year where aesthetically, thinking differently, as he says, makes the most sense. However, I would also say this is not the year where it makes the most sense to buy the base model. That year was across the board the iPhone 12. The iPhone 12, where the Pro was barely any better than the regular one. I guess the Pro Max was the only model that was like truly big and therefore had the largest battery, because obviously under it we had the 12 mini, the 12 and the 12 Pro. So if you really wanted the best battery life, you went for the 12 Pro Max. If you wanted everything else, like, and the best camera, that was also 12 Pro Max exclusive, and then the regular 12 had kind of the same cameras as the Pro, it's just that the Pro had the telephoto camera, but that telephoto camera was not so good anyway, so you might as well have just zoomed in from the main camera in a way. Except for like portrait modes. At that point, they were really dependent on having a good telephoto camera. But yeah, like to me, like this was the year to talk about, like 4 years ago to be precise. I know that people always forget something that was more than 2 years ago in the tech landscape. People will just say, this is the smallest difference between a base model and the Pro iPhone ever. And by that, they mean literally that difference is smaller than of the last iPhone and the last iPhone. Because the iPhone 12 series had a far smaller gap between the Pro and the non-Pro models. Um, like, I guess you could argue, well, if you really disliked having 4 gigs of RAM inside the iPhone 12, you really should have gotten the 12 Pro with 6 gigabytes. Most people care about that far less than they do nowadays about promotion. Which of course the 12 Pros did not yet have promotion, so they were just as smooth as the 12s. It's when the 13 Pro introduced promotion that the gap started to widen to the base models in just like your average experience, because the smoothness of your device is, in my opinion, a big part of the experience. If you're someone who is lucky enough to basically not see the difference between 60 or even 90 hertz, much less 120, that's up to you. That's good for you. You get to save money. I see the difference on a phone. I very, very much see the difference on an iPad, where 60 hertz is just completely unacceptable to me. And I see it kind of on the TV. I benefit from lower latency in gaming, I guess, on my PS5 whenever a game has like 90 hertz modes or something like that. But for just general UI smoothness, no, I don't care about 120 hertz on a 65-inch screen. I wouldn't care it on like a 4.5-inch screen, I guess. But I do care about it on like 6-inch up to 13, 14, 15, 16 inches. Or 17 inches if Apple ever makes like a 17-inch laptop. Everything that is larger then becomes a different perspective, because you're sitting further away, and everything that is smaller is also makes a difference, because now you're like, oh, I don't even see that many details on the screen, or at least I don't. Josephat saying, I believe the differences are not small, but you can argue that they're less relevant for the average consumer. I actually agree, but those differences do not make you buy a base model the year after you had the Pro model. Those differences make you buy a base model over a Pro in general whenever you upgrade. In fact, one thing that I will give you, Josephat, and this is, again, really my problem with John Prosser saying that, because I know he had the 15 Pro Max, but if he had a 13 Pro Max even, right, and he said, now I want the base model, because the base model is like, it's so much prettier now. The cameras are even better than on my 13 Pro, right? The battery is even just as good as on my 13 Pro Max and better than it would be on the 13 Pro. The display is actually brighter. Might not be ProMotion, but it has like the dynamic island instead of a notch. And I found that the stainless steel device was just too heavy for me. I know that technically the new Pros are lighter because of titanium, but let me just get the base model, let me get the lightest model available. That's very good. That I could understand, even the loss of promotion at that point. Not to me personally, but to the average consumer, as you put it. But not to John Prosser. Like...
everything iPhone hardware should be. It's compelling, and a phone that I know I will use 100% of. And I gotta be honest, there's something really charming about going back to basics. It's much lighter than my previous 15 Pro. It looks better.
Oh, okay, he had the 15 Pro, not 15 Pro Max. Okay.
A lot better, and it's almost comfy. Something about the edges of this phone make it feel soft in your hand. It's like for the first time in years, I have just a phone in my pocket. I really like that. And
I mean... The weight difference is not that huge. Armored Core, isn't Apple working on putting their own custom modems in the iPhone? Yeah, they are. Supposedly the iPhone SE will actually be the first entry in that, and supposedly Apple's own modems will not have millimeter wave, 5G in general. So I believe they want to soften the blow with technically having like an inferior modem in some ways by starting it with the iPhone SE, and then like the next generation, like the second generation of Apple modems, which will be much more improved, but still lack some stuff that simply doesn't get support across the world, like millimeter wave. I believe that will then come. Like leakers have said that the iPhone Air next year could already get those modems, but the Pro models, they are at least away into 2026 to get Apple's own modems. Again, we do not know if Apple even maybe they don't have a modem in the works that will completely obliterate like Qualcomm and the higher end. Maybe they will even prolong their contract, but supposedly they're working on their own 5G modem that will debut in the iPhone SE4, and supposedly they're working on a new Wi-Fi modem that is going to replace Broadcom, and that is going to debut in some iPad next year. It would actually be fascinating if that new iPhone SE4 and new iPad Air that I talked in the beginning of the video would actually launch together, and one of them has a new 5G modem and one of them has a new Wi-Fi modem. Who knows? At that point, maybe that new iPad Air also gets that new 5G modem, since iPad don't even get millimeter wave, so that wouldn't be a loss in the first place. And the iPad Air, I apologize, and the iPad Air doesn't get the newest modem. So having maybe even like Apple's own, maybe potentially inferior modem wouldn't actually be a downgrade over the older modem that it had on the iPad Pro or on the iPhone Pro models that do get the latest and greatest modems from Qualcomm. That is a different discussion. And in Wi-Fi, it becomes a question, well, will Apple's first Wi-Fi modem have Wi-Fi 7, for example, which now became standard across the entire iPhone 16 lineup? So a lot of interesting stuff.
And the color?
Tipo Master, welcome. You really don't seem to be missing much for 60% the cost in the SE4. Am I missing something? The ultra-wide dynamic island, a bit less HDR nits, but the screen upgrade will be huge anyways. Yes, if you're a price-conscious consumer, I assume that Apple will find ways to make it worse in distinct ways, like from the speakers to the microphones, stuff like that. Of course, we know that like the iPhone SE, the last generation that we currently have, launched at the time when we have had night mode literally for years on every iPhone, but it didn't have it. While I don't expect that to be replicated exactly with night mode, I could see it being still inferior in some way that we have really gotten accustomed to with every iPhone in recent years. I wouldn't be able to tell you what it is. Josephat, assuming John gets a new iPhone every year, at what point would it be okay to downgrade to the base model? 3 generations. I'll just call it that. 13 to the 14 to the 15 to the 16. If you go from that 13 Pro to that 16 base, that would be okay. A-okay, in my opinion. If you go from the 14, yes, if you go from the 14 to the 16, that from the 14 Pro to the 16, that's still okay-ish to me. Especially since that was a stainless steel device, so maybe you don't even know that the new Pros are titanium and already lighter, and maybe you really don't like that the 16 Pros are actually a little heavier than the 15 Pros, and then that would be kind of excusable. But that jump from 15 Pro to 16, like, that is a reviewer move or a rich person's move, in my opinion. Or you just, for some reason, you like the colors so much, you actually sell your iPhone 15 Pro at such a good price that you pay down like 90% of the cost of the new 16 if you wanted to. Yeah, again, I do not dictate his purchasing decisions. I do point out that they are a little weird, but that's my opinion. You can agree with that or disagree with that. Armored Core, you're welcome. And Angelica, I'm very glad that you're enjoying hearing my voice. Thank you so much for joining.
I mean, come on. The color is the best ever on an iPhone, actually infused into the glass itself.
Yeah,
the color on
Ultramarine
all
is really great. I hear that people who like teal really love this teal. I hear from people who love pink that they would have loved this to be Barbie pink, but they will still take it over non-pink. And obviously it's good because we had rumors that we would only get colors, right? Because no, don't forget, white and black aren't colors; they're technically contrasts in color science, I believe. And we had rumors that we would be getting basically these three colors plus yellow, but it turned out to be just regular white slash silver and black, which was rumored to for us to not get, but thankfully we did get.
Personal, all right? Now it's your turn. With a phone like this, I gotta ask, do you really need this one? iPhone.
And again, Josepha, this is where we come to a different point. If you're upgrading from a 5-year-old iPhone that never had promotion, had the telephoto camera that would perform worse than just the 2x digital zoom inside the 16 on the 48 megapixel sensor, like if you upgrade from that and you just think, oh my god, the pros have gotten so pro, right? Do I really need them? Maybe my needs have kind of stuck in the middle, right? And I could make do with a base model, even though base iPhone models are more expensive than some Android flagships. But do I really want to pay $200, even $300 extra for the pros? Then I could really see that argument. And this is, for example, I would be recommending for most people right now to get the 16. But most people, I assume, do not have a very enthusiast understanding of technology. They do not have a lot of experience with tech like promotion, and they do not have experience with having a very versatile 3-camera back array and stuff like that. They might not care about stuff like titanium or whatever. I don't care about titanium, to be honest. I care about durability, but titanium does help with that. Then I would still be recommending and saying oh yeah, save your money. I did that when the iPhone 12 was out. I skipped that generation because I was still plenty happy with my 10s Max. But to anybody who came to me, because I have a circle of friends, family members, and then their friends and family members who then usually come to ask me about tech ever since I was 10 years old. And people were asking, should I buy the 12 Pro? It has that shiny new stainless steel body, or should I get the regular 12? And I would be look, technically, of course, the pros are better in some ways, right? More RAM will help you keep more apps open at the same time. However, you save enough money that technically you could just put in a upgrade down the road. I also assume that the regular 12 model would lose its price less so than the pros, because it was just, in my opinion, a better deal from the start. And that stainless steel body, while it would be in some ways more durable, it would also contribute, of course, to your device being much heavier. And hey, that telephoto lens is cool, but it actually eats up some internal space and results in the Pro iPhone 12 having a smaller battery, even if it's just by a little, than the regular 12. If you really want the best, get the Pro Max. You get the best camera systems. You get the largest battery, right? That's what you do. But if you are deciding between the two regular models, get the non-Pro version. And this year, I could make some of those same arguments, but I would just argue they're actually less pronounced this year than with the 12 model.
16 Pro is the first iPhone that's 2 Pro, even for me. Many of the
No, I disagree with that. I think there will always be features, especially, yes, in the Pro models, that you cannot take advantage of. When we talk about the 4 microphone system with voice isolation across video modes and stuff like that. Yeah, maybe most people won't use that, but in general, they will benefit from having slightly larger, better microphones. And the same goes for the ultra wide is the same sensor size, but it's a 48 megapixel camera. So if you do Pro RAW at 48 megapixels, you actually do get a better image, despite the pixels being a lot smaller. And while most people probably won't click on Pro RAW, Apple still does some pixel aggregation stuff that makes night mode a little bit better and stuff like that. USB-C, you might not really benefit from 10 gigabits per second all the time, but maybe once in a blue moon you will like connect data, or somebody else will, or somebody who you sell your device to down the road might actually care about it, and then of course they would care that you have a pro model to sell to them and not the base model. Like, there will always be features that you cannot take full advantage of yourself because of whatever background you have or don't have, whatever like area you might even live in in a way. But yeah, I just, it's not about using every feature, it's using enough features to justify getting the pros.
Features here are starting to encroach into our territory. Don't get me wrong, the things that iPhone 16
And
Pro
again, this is I pause him a lot, but when people say like, oh, I criticize him, but an average consumer, no, he does not think like an average consumer. The arguments he will presenting right now are actually arguments about like how it impacts him as a content creator, because spoiler alert, this entire video was shot in an iPhone 16.
is capable of absolutely mind-blowing. But it's also getting very specific. If somehow I have enough time to shoot ProRes log video with an iPhone or use it to capture studio quality audio, then surely I have enough time to just use the real thing. The results from 16 Pro are good, but I know I can do it better. If this is going to be your everything—
I mean, not you, your very expensive equipment, which for somebody who might wait, what, that is actually wrong. What do you mean? If you can shoot ProRes log, you can do it the real way, like with a professional camera that by itself might cost twice, 3 times the price of the iPhone Pro, 4 or 5 times even with a good lens. Like Drew from Tailosive Tech captures all his content on the channel now with his iPhone 15 Pro. And while I don't think he uses ProRes log, he still benefits from the pros having, in general, better cameras than the non-pros. Like, I don't really get it, because the counter argument here, and Joseph had, like, we argued about it, like, our counters for the average consumer is, oh, I get to save money. His argument is, I get to save money to then spend more money on pro equipment.
device, including for content creation, then absolutely spring for this. It's not only worth it, it's a value. The microphone you're hearing—
True, Tippermaster, iPhone 16s are great for video until you have to get the fire hose of data off with a USB 2 speed port. Yes, this is why even if it was capable of capturing ProRes, ProRes, not ProRAW, like, then it would be like a nightmare to transfer that.
right now
True.
is
Thank you.
$1,300 by itself. Our studio camera, you don't even want to know. This iPhone can get you 75% of the way there. It costs less than our microphone.
By the way, he already showed you that, yeah, that camera is not being used.
And also does phone stuff. The difference for me this year is I just want the phone stuff. See, the gap between the Pro models and base models has never been smaller.
That is objectively wrong, and I know that it's technically like weird to hang so onto that difference between that the iPhone 12 series had a far smaller gap between the regular 12 and the 12 Pro. But I will hang on to that. It's not that far off. It's just 4 years. It's 2020. It's a device that was sold like for literally years in the lineup, the regular 12. Like, and the 12 Pro, of course, stopped selling like 3 years ago. We should remember that stuff. It's factual. It's history. I'm not crying. My voice is giving up. I think I'll finish today with this review, and we might look at Max Tech like on Friday.
Regular 16, it doesn't feel like Apple is holding anything back. It doesn't feel like you're being punished with a worse experience if you don't get the Pro. And that's how it should be. Sure, some features like ProMotion and the always-on display did not make their way to the 16 from the Pro.
I don't care about.
Neither of these
By the way,
features are anything
one feature where I will say the pros are too pro for me is the always-on display. I don't like it. I don't really like it on my Apple Watch either, but I sometimes turn it on just for fun, I guess. I never have it on my iPhone. I can never find a reason to do so.
I care about. I get it. If a 60 hertz display is a complete deal breaker for you, that's fine. But it is not for me. And it isn't for most people outside of this weird tech bubble.
I agree. Again, nothing that I would disagree with here.
Don't worry though, this is far from Apple's worst crime here. But
I actually disagree on that one because I think that this device is actually phenomenal except for the lack of promotion. His complaints will be more software related, more philosophy related, and I will be dissecting those claims, but this is probably why I had such issues with some of his claims in general. I guess I'm wired against this video now.
we'll get to that. Oh, and the always-on display? Yeah, I straight up forgot about that being a thing until our writer, Brian, reminded me about it. So, oh well, I guess I didn't care about it too much. The A18 chip in iPhone 16 is already faster and more capable than I could ever need. You can't find a phone from any of the big players that struggles to do any task that a phone is supposed to do. And the iPhone 16...
Subjective what a phone is supposed to do. Some people play games on their phones. There you can really make your phone struggle. The dissipation of heat from a chip, of course, also partially depending on how efficient that chip is, so in how much heat it actually creates in any given scenario. That is probably more of a question of how the device is built, but I guess it's very related to the processor. There's definitely a big jump from the A16 to the A18 chip, from the iPhone 15 to now the 16. So I can get his points. It's not like I think he has no points here at all. Joseph saying, agree, promotion is the only regret I have with my new 16. Well, the next 17 will have promotion.
16 is no exception. Email, YouTube, browsing TikTok, wasting money on Amazon. There is no universe where I would need to do those things any faster. It's 2024. Most phones are faster than you need them to be. The speed differences here are negligible. Even the camera, while technically being a downgrade from my 15 Pro, is crazy good. The base 16 is missing an entire lens compared to the Pro, but that doesn't matter as much anymore. We used to need to compensate poor, small smartphone sensors by adding more specific lenses, but the sensor in this phone gives you more than enough headroom to work with. Need to zoom? There's enough megapixels here to allow for zoom cropping. The main sensor on iPhone 16 is 48 megapixels. Our studio camera, 33. There's rarely going to be a moment that you could capture with iPhone 16 Pro that you couldn't also capture with this.
True. If you really don't care about the nuances of the image, I actually agree. They have the same smart HDR pipeline. So yeah, I wouldn't actually disagree with that here.
And plus, the vertical 2-lens array on the back of iPhone 16 just looks so much better than the massive chunk of lenses that's sticking out of the Pro. You can't change my mind.
Don't care. Don't care whatsoever. Functionality over design. What I was gonna say. Oh my God, what is the guy John? No, I want to say Prosser because I'm watching a front page tech video. Well, who is the new hardware elite at Apple? The one who was responsible for the Pro team, like the Macs that we're like. Not John Tester, that's also a different person. The one who is rumored to replace Tim Cook eventually. Like, do you guys know? Because I really don't want to look it up in the web. Please, my beehive, give me info. Fly out and come back with info from Apple's website or Wikipedia or the Mark Gurman report on Tim Cook's replacement. Or maybe it will just fly into my brain by itself.
I'm taking no further questions. The way photographic styles are integrated again this year is very good. I personally love using them as a set and forget way to add my own vibe to every photo I take.
Yeah, I've recently set up photographic styles on my 15 Pro, make it a little bit more contrasty, a tiny bit cooler. Have found out I really like it. Never changed it. Would probably play around with it again once it gets sunny and it might need a little bit more tuning again. Having obviously this interface helps. Tippomaster, John Turnus, that's correct. Thank you, my little bees. Bzz, bzz. Your queen is very happy. Thank you so much.
But if you want, even on the
Yeah, was going to say that interface is very nice. I tried it quickly in the camera app. It's definitely a lot more convenient than the current photographic styles on my 15 Pro Max. Of course, that one is also using slightly different parameters, so this like tone and palette is a little bit different. And Relay also coming in hot with the John Turner's fact check. Thank you so much.
base models, you can really start to tinker and play with color in your own way.
And Josephat saying lol, which I'll take it as helpful as well.
Mix is pure witchcraft. I mean, I would never use it, but I'm an artist. For people who don't know anything about audio or just don't want to
I always forget that feature is actually on the non-pro models as well. Man, Apple really, like, they have some quality stuff that they bring to the non-pro models that no other company does. Like speaker quality, microphone quality, haptics, now buttons, right? The only thing that they cannot bring themselves to put into an $800, $900 device is something that people are putting into $300 smartphones, which is high refresh rate. Again, like people forget the phones doing 120 hertz and $300, they usually suck in my opinion. They have like LTPS panels, not even the highest quality ones. They sometimes don't even have the response time to give you proper 120 hertz. Something, for example, people criticize on mini LED Max, right? They say like, oh, they don't respond quickly enough to even give you full 120 hertz. But obviously OLED is much faster in general, but sometimes OLED can be not tuned that well. And yeah, then those LTPS panels, they're basically overclocked. This is why they are more prone to all those like green line issues. Those devices basically run a little out of spec, while you can have a high quality LTPS panel usually on a device above $600 that will give you nice 120 hertz. Once you really go down below the especially below the $400 price point, I would really not look at 120 hertz as a very good thing. Like, if anything, I would probably turn it off on a device of that price point to save battery life, save some of the performance overhead from the probably low-end chip, and to increase the longevity of the display. Armored Core, do you think the recording of up to 120 FPS ability to the pros is big enough pull factor to make those considering iPhone 16 to buy the 16 Pro? In short, no, because I think that most average consumers probably don't care about it. I think anybody who just cares about pro functionality in general, like 120 hertz 4K in this case, those people would already be more drawn to the pros, not just because they have 4K, but 4K 120, but because they do have a larger main sensor, because they do have the 3 cameras, stuff like that, right? I do not think that 4K 120 by itself would have been a game changer. Like, let's say the sensors are the same, the optics are the same, right? The image pipeline is exactly the same. Even the readout speeds from the sensor is the same. I don't think that would have changed too much, but because we do know that the main sensor in the Pro models is now, well, it's the same size as the last one, but it's actually a new generation sensor, a little more efficient and a bit faster. So that allows for the 4K 120 readout. And I think that all the other things that make everything else better, like night mode, because the sensor is larger, captures data a little quicker versus the non-pros, that probably matters more, but then it also becomes like a better than the sum of your parts, right? More than the sum of your parts. You have all those individual little improvements over the base models, and that is what creates the pro experience, not one of those features, not one of those improvements.
Around in that department, Apple has somehow been able to replicate sounds.
But again, also, I think that if you're somebody who really cares about it, unless it's literally like your first iPhone ever, you probably were buying Pro iPhones already, right? Like, it's very unlikely, like if you're like a teen who just got some money, and you previously were like slumping around with like $250 like either used devices or very cheap Android devices, and now you have finally the money to choose between the base iPhone and the Pro iPhone, I really think that that's a niche case. If you are somebody who wants the pro features and like stuff like 4K 120, you probably were already coming from a pro iPhone and probably aren't even considering the non-pros.
Make it sound like you recorded in a studio in a semi-convincing way. The coolest part? Audio mixes on the 16 Pro and the regular 16. The brand new camera control button is the standout change to hardware this year for both 16 and 16 Pro, and it's great in theory, but it's never the idea that matters most. It's the implementation. And in this case, camera control is a great idea with poor, borderline lazy implementation.
This is where I will disagree, because I think that we can argue, we can criticize the positioning of the camera. There is some stuff here that I will be greatly criticizing.
This button gives you access to, they are not new, and most of the time are more easily accessed without using the button at all. And wow.
No, those features are extra to the capture button. Those are not the main selling points. The photographic styles are far quicker to change. I've tested it out yesterday. I can tell you that now. Changing between photographic styles is far faster on the capture button or camera control. And the rest of the functionality of the camera control button mainly is just about take your device out, click on the button and take the photo. It's not about all that swiping. That swiping really... I'm sorry. I guess I got too angry. I'm the hiccup Hulk here. You wouldn't like me when I'm hicking up. Is that a verb? I'm having hiccups, I guess. The thing when it comes to all the other stuff like zooming in, changing exposure slightly, yes, that is technically better on the main large screen, but that is not the main selling point. Those are just features that are baked into it. The reason they exist is because maybe you're using it like this, right? And you wouldn't want to like move your phone around anymore to click on the main screen. Who knows? Maybe you're even using some kind of gloves that work on the capture button but don't work on the main screen. Don't hold me accountable for that. I'm not sure. But those things are add-ons. They are not the main selling point of the capture button. The main point of the capture button is just point and shoot with basically a click. And it's just baffling to me that people who have, for example, even maybe set like in previous generations the action button to capture a photo don't see the benefit. To me, the benefit would be simply that for now I've used the action button, which has a far worse placement in my opinion than camera control, and now I can actually free my action button to do something else.
While camera control is one of my disappointments with the iPhone 16, it is, unfortunately, still not the fatal flaw that I alluded to earlier. Let's talk about that after the sponsor break. Man, the iPhone 16 is great, huh? You know what isn't great is, thanks to the screen iPhone.
I usually watch ads on videos we steal, but I do want to get this a little bit quicker over with.
So the big secret about Apple, of course, not so big secret maybe, is that Apple views itself as a software company.
One of my biggest...
Yes, Apple is a software company that makes hardware. It's not a hardware company that makes software. Ultimately, I would argue that that is a distinction between without a difference at this point, because Apple cannot stop making either one. Like Microsoft is definitely a software company that makes hardware, right? Samsung is a hardware company that definitely makes software. Apple, their hardware and software development is so intertwined at this point, they couldn't stop making one without so significantly hurting the other, right? Microsoft or Google could stop making Surface or Pixel devices tomorrow, and Windows and Android would still continue just as they always have. The main core business is not the hardware here. Samsung could basically stop developing One UI, maybe just as Google Google, could you help us along with like a very clean, like default Android experience? Right? And hopefully, if that default new experience is smooth and good, then they wouldn't lose their hardware business. Because honestly, One UI is not the biggest selling point of a Samsung device. It's a point of familiarity because a lot of people have gotten used to it. But when you objectively compare it to like very refined versions of Android these days, the gap is not as far ahead of like Chinese manufacturers as it once was. So One UI again could go away. Samsung business would still stay. Think about that with iPhone and iOS. Could Apple, without hurting the iPhone, just next year say the new iPhone is running Android and not hurt iPhone sales? Could Apple like completely make iOS available to other phone manufacturers without hurting the perception that an Apple piece of hardware is the only if it's the only hardware where you can get certain Apple software like the main OS, right? Like that same Steve Jobs who he showed was also the one, I might have even been in the same interview, who said that bringing Safari to Windows was like bringing a cold glass of water to somebody in hell. This is what he thought, that software was like a selling point, a big selling point, and he loved software, but he ultimately wanted to make great software to sell hardware. Now, sometimes you used to actually sell software. Some of my viewers might be too young to remember that, but for example, Apple's iLife and iWork suites of software actually used to cost money. To upgrade to the latest release of Macintosh, or OS 10 to be more precise, used to cost money. Even in the very early days of iPhone and iPod Touch, it did cost money to upgrade to the latest version of iPhone OS at that point, before it was rebranded to iOS. So Steve Jobs was talking about those things in a very different market, in a very different state of Apple's existence. So just putting it out there as if it means anything, like for modern Apple that is so intertwined. Apple at this point is a hardware and software company. I don't think you can actually put one ahead of the other, even in the way Steve Jobs once said. I don't think so.
Gripes with the tech community at large is that we seem to constantly get so caught up in changes to hardware that we forget what really makes a good phone.
I mean, that's not really true. Like MKBHD does like instant reactions to WWDC. He gives you a review of the latest iOS version. Every reviewer has talked about Apple Intelligence this year, that it will be coming. Why isn't it coming with iOS 18.0? Why do I have to wait for iOS 18.1? Like again, it's kind of a true statement. It's a truthy statement, right? You know that Stephen Colbert gag where like or philosophy even, where something feels true, but it doesn't really necessarily have to. Truthiness doesn't come from your brain. It comes from the gut. Right? And I think that a lot of statements from John Prosser are not based in like hard history facts. I think they come from the gut in that regard. Apple didn't have their own chips back then. Yes, but when we talk about hardware design, we are talking about much more than just processors. Don't forget that Apple even got Intel, for example, when they made their first Intel Core 2 Duo Max to make a specific like new chip for them that was much smaller. They worked with them very early on to make a very small motherboard around it. So Apple was, even when they were not making chips themselves, which by the way, don't forget that Apple used to have basically like who made the G4 chips and stuff like that. iMac G4. Nope, not 4. G4. iMac G4 product family, blah 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 blah. Can I have just like who makes, it's a PowerPC G4 processor. is a designation formerly used by Apple to describe blah 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 blah. Wasn't it like a collaboration design where it's like Apple still had big influence on the designs from like IBM and like Motorola even? Tipomaster saying it's an IBM chip, yeah. But Apple was like really instrumental in the fact that these chips were even still being made, because Apple was at that point like the largest buyer of those chips. Right? Am I crazy about that? Like, here, much of the 7400 design was done by Motorola in a close cooperation with Apple and IBM. Yeah. And I believe at that point, like a lot of stuff like, Motorola and whatever had flown into this. I should probably do like a lot of history in that point. It's very interesting actually to know just how much more cooperative Apple was with companies before that, where like this is actually really bad, which is like PowerPC really was a collaborative effort across so many different companies for a while, and then Intel just won out and all that cooperation went away, and a lot of companies that used to do very good stuff like either stopped existing or became like single use companies. Tipomaster, they had inputs of course, but the PowerPC G3 was the PowerPC 750, the G5 was the 900 series, right, that's the correct naming. There were rebrands of either IBM chips. I guess I could take it as a rebrands, yes. I wouldn't take it as just like saying they are like off-the-shelf chips, but there is definitely like maybe not customization on the die level, but whatever Apple is like developing through the motherboards, and then of course with the software that's designed for it. But I'll take it. It's definitely not an Apple design chip in the way that Apple Silicon is. Apple is also probably the reason Intel did the Iris Pro. No one else used the EDRAM model except Apple at the time. That is true. I actually remember that. I remember that like on Discord. Maybe that was one of the few early cases where I actually argued with people online. It was a couple of years into Apple launching like Iris Pro graphics. That history is very fascinating. I should do more research again. I used to know a lot more when I was a kid. I wrote like a report on Apple's entire history as kind of like my dissertation, I guess. In the last grade of high school, we had to write something and present it and stuff like that. It influenced our grades a lot. And I wrote about Apple, and I used to know all of that. I should like read up on that again. Thank you, Tipomaster, though. Some very, very good history here. So let's continue that. So what I was just going to say, though, Apple was never hands off with hardware. Like that would be ridiculous.
Software. Remember how I said the camera control button was poorly implemented? Yeah, it's in the software where that happened.
Actually not. Like, it's the positioning that it's the worst. Let's see what he says about the software.
The button itself is fine, good even, but inside the camera app where you actually use it...
By the way, guys, we've been streaming for about 2 hours now. If you like what you're seeing, you want to see more of that, subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit the notification bell so you know when I'm going live. I always forget to tell you that. Share the video to friends and family members who you think might enjoy it. Comment live. I love interacting with you guys. And if you want to support this channel directly, consider leaving a super chat or a super sticker or becoming a channel member. Shout out to Angelica and Max Maximus, who are MarkTech Pro Max channel members right here on YouTube, or become a supporter over on Patreon.
It's more redundant than anything. They didn't even bother to adapt the camera app to this feature.
They actually did.
Lazily tacked on and quite literally overlapping the bottom portion of the app. I mean, the functions take...
I mean, it does until it doesn't, right? Like, we just saw it right here. It just flows perfectly into the black. And when it gets larger, yes, I mean, you can argue that when I make my mouse stand out so I can see it better, for a second, that it looks too large or whatever. But that's the function here. Similar, like, what else would you do? You want to still focus it around the actual camera button. Like, it's just like, this is where perfectionism, in my opinion, is meaningless. Look, I don't want to, like this, for example, to not be around the capture button, right? If suddenly it was like halfway off center and even in small mode overlapping like where this starts. But what Apple does, it definitely is integrated into the camera app, right? For example, all those other controls, they go away when you click on the camera control, right? This design is not your regular camera app. This is the more subdued design that comes when you click on it, right? Probably we're gonna have an animation for that.
But inside the camera app, where you
Look, oh, they don't have the original look, do they? No, unfortunately. Oh yeah, here. This is what the camera looks regularly, right? And then you click on the camera button,
bother to adapt to the
camera
app
control
to this feature. It's just lazily
and it becomes black or translucent. Like the other control elements go away. Like that is the point. This is why it then also can become larger, so maybe you can still see it well.
on and quite literally overlapping the bottom portion of the app.
I mean, who cares? Like, what? Why does that? Like, what do you would you want it to move around to the left a lot? Right? You still want the main one to be here, so that like if you are a left to right reader, which most of us are in the West, like those are such meaningless complaints. I never cared about those things in iOS, Android. The reason why I preferred iOS design language was always more about the simplicity aspect, how clean everything is, how consistent everything is. Like, this is just so meaningless to me. I don't know. Guys, let me know. Is that something you really care about? That in the in the specific mode where you like select the individual controls and it becomes a little bit larger for a moment, that it overlaps other elements? Is that really something that bothers you?
Functions take too many steps to access, and by the time you're ready, the moment is gone. But that's why these are so important in the first place. Somehow we have taken for granted just how easily accessible cameras like this are to us, that they are on the phones that we're going to carry around anyway in our pocket all day, every day. But the real benefit to using this over the real deal is convenience. The ability to capture any moment in front of you, not just quickly, but reliably. And the camera control button not only strays from that, it breaks it. Even the very best hardware is only ever as good.
He says it breaks it, but nothing he said broke the experience. Like you can still just get out your phone and now capture the image quicker by clicking on the camera button. You don't have to swipe anywhere. You don't have to click the camera button on the lock screen. You can even get rid of that one button to click. Like, I don't get it. It doesn't break anything. It's an extra thing. And because camera is something a lot of people use, Apple decided, let us not burden the action button with people remapping camera access to it. Let us not put extra like quadruple click functionality on the power button. Let us give people an extra button, and while we're at it, we can give it some extra controls, but they're more like a cherry on top rather than the main selling point.
As it's software. You're not buying a Mac, you're buying Mac OS.
I am buying both. Apple Silicon is a huge deal. If Windows was perfectly optimized for like Apple Silicon, like I am running Windows on my Mac occasionally. Like, yes, I do prefer Mac OS over Windows, but I also do prefer like Apple Silicon hardware over competing contemporary like AMD or Intel hardware these days. At a time when Macs didn't have that benefit, I actually didn't upgrade to my late 2012 iMac for years, for literally close to a decade, because I wasn't really in love with the hardware of Macs. So no, I do buy Macs also for hardware, and even very Apple-specific hardware.
The iPhone, you're buying iOS.
I do buy an iPhone also for the way Apple treats their hardware, with how complicated it is to make, for example, a small smartphone camera sensor shine. Would I love the full 1-inch sensor, maybe from like a Xiaomi Ultra device or whatever in my iPhone? Maybe, but fundamentally, I do prefer the I guess you could call it software that Apple does with smart HDR now and stuff like that. But that smart HDR functionality didn't drop off a tree. Apple also had to make a chip that can handle it with an image signal processor fast enough to do it, with media encoders and decoders for videos so that video capture isn't just good, but playing them back is sufficient. That is all hardware and software. If you just think that those things are good because iOS or even just because optimization, you're wrong. It's because that hardware has been designed for years with the idea in mind. What are the actual use cases that people use on iOS? Let's design hardware specifically tailored for that, specifically optimized for that, as on a basic level as how many transistors we give to the image signal processor, to the media encode and decode engines and stuff like that.
Unfortunately, iOS 18 does not feel like the newest, best version of iOS. The very best of Apple culminated.
I mean, it literally does, but whatever. Like, it does have its bugs right now. It arguably launched smoother than iOS 17 did, where I believe, like, the iPhone 15 Pro launched with, like, overheating issues, and there was, like, one iOS 17 release that made devices, like, crash on a broad basis. So, yeah, I don't get it.
Into one refined experience.
There's
Instead,
one statement here.
iOS 18 feels like every version of iOS ever piled on top of each other.
This statement, this is the one statement I shared on Twitter that I fundamentally disagree with, but also agree with. The point is that this statement is meaningless. Of course, iOS 18 will be like every iOS version. Yeah, I know the negative connotation here comes from piled on top of each other, right? That it's a mindless implementation, if you want. But it is the culmination of years of effort. Like, there will be elements that you don't like in iOS 18 because those elements will be refined maybe in iOS 20. That is the case for every iOS release. iOS 7, for example, was a fresh start, and many people hated it for that. It then was refined in iOS 8, iOS 9, and then a lot of stuff was changed again in iOS 10, right? And then we had to start a new process of refinement in a way. And then iOS 14 introduced like widgets, and now we are in the process of refining those. And now Apple changed around the control center a lot, so we will be in the process of refining that. That is how it works. No singular version is perfect. No singular version, especially with its new stuff, hits it completely out of the park. That wasn't the case with Steve Jobs. That wasn't the case for iLife or iWork back in the day when it cost money. Like, everything is always in the process of refinement, especially when we are talking about utilitarian things. We're not talking about a piece of art that is supposed to like exist for centuries untouched, unburdened by what was before, to use the slogan of the Democrats. I love it, but it's funny. That is completely different. An operating system fundamentally will be best when it's actually least in the way, and the more features you add, because you bet your ass people want more features. People always scream, oh no, I want an iOS 12 style refinement. Oh no, I want macOS Snow Leopard, right? But then those are the same people who will then complain that Apple Intelligence didn't launch the exact minute that Apple might have hinted at during WWDC. There's so much hypocrisy here.
There are just too many cooks in this kitchen.
That is not true. The Apple's design and engineering teams are actually incredibly small by industry standards. Like, Apple designs so much more than like the Windows design team, for example, because Apple has iOS, iPadOS, macOS, tvOS, watchOS, HomeOS, visionOS, right? And then they upgrade them annually, where Windows will give you like a new major release every 4 or 5 years. And they do that with like comparably sized teams. This is flat out wrong. This is not even truthiness. This is falsiness.
due to Apple's complete obsession with secrecy,
That
those
is also not true. Apple's regular software design teams are not the secretive teams that we are talking about when we are talking about Vision Pro, for example. It's when a maybe a brand new piece of software might be secretive, like Apple Intelligence itself, right? A brand new piece of hardware, a brand new device category for Apple, like Vision Pro, could be secretive. But no, Apple's regular development from iOS 17 to iOS 18 will be done largely by the same people who upgraded iOS 16 to iOS 17. There won't be a team there suddenly that doesn't tell the other team what they're doing. No, not for the basic design stuff.
teams don't communicate properly.
That is just taking one thing that you sort of believe you know about Apple, and you're just juxtaposing it, you're projecting it on other aspects of Apple where it doesn't apply. I know Apple is more secretive than other companies, but Apple has always been more secretive than other companies. They've always had some teams completely in the dark over others, right? And somehow they still design great hardware and great software over the years for us. And suddenly this has supposed to have changed.
iOS 18 feels redundant. It's change for the sake of it. It feels heavy, messy, incomplete, rushed. Those words don't even begin to properly describe the feeling of frustration that I have. And that's just frustration over what actually made it in, because many, if not most, of the features advertised for iOS 18...
By the way, and this is the best thing, right? You cannot win sometimes as a big company in a way because people just love talking about you. But he says oh, iOS 18 feels rushed. But you know what's the actual issue? It's that Apple Intelligence was delayed. And I'm like, what? Wait, you just said it's rushed. So Apple rushed iOS 18, but was smart enough to not rush Apple Intelligence. But it's also bad that they didn't rush Apple Intelligence, because you expected it in September and now it's coming in October. So that's completely unacceptable. What?
And yes, even the 16 series did not. Okay, here we go. Apple Intelligence, the elephant in the room. It was announced months ago. And not as a promise for iPhone 16, Apple Intelligence is not exclusive to these phones. It was promised for iOS 18.
It wasn't. I really cannot stress that enough. It was announced alongside iOS 18, iPadOS 18, macOS Sequoia, watchOS 11, whatever. It was announced for the iPhone 15 Pro and 15 Pro Max and newer iPhone models. It was never designed to be if you want to argue, that Apple Intelligence should have launched the second it came with that an iPhone came out with a processor capable of handling it, then criticize it that Apple didn't launch Apple Intelligence last year. For all that matters. Also, Apple Intelligence is coming to every Apple Silicon Mac, every iPad with M1 or newer, right? It's an extra feature. I know we want to talk about that feature because, contrary to what reviewers are saying, they actually love more features. They all claim they all want just the most refined, most innocent version of iOS. That's not true. They want new features. And then they, of course, want to critique those features too.
And yeah, while I'm sure Apple Intelligence will be good, maybe even great, it's not here. They say some features are coming in October, but only some of them, and only
Yes, and that will be the case for all of Apple Intelligence ever. I believe that Apple Intelligence will be the most piecemeal thing in Apple software history. They will launch a new LLM for a new task, basically, whenever it's ready, and then they will announce the new one, and then we'll be waiting for a new feature or a refinement of an older one, right? You're getting new Apple Intelligence stuff in iOS 18.1, 18.2, 18.3, 18.4, iOS 19. That, yes, that is part of a continuous rollout. Why would you want everything on launch date if that would mean getting it bad. Like even on consoles, like a launch period game is like a game that might come out in the first 6 or 9 months of the console. It's not necessarily just the console just the game that releases right alongside the console, and that's because people understand you don't want to cram in everything in at once. Some things might not sell, or they might not get the attention that they deserve if they have to coexist with everything else. It is bad for media coverage in general, because now your hardware is launching at the exact same day as your software, and that software is also all at once, right? You do not have any kind of like stepping here to make sure that like, oh, maybe this feature deserves extra attention. Let's put it into a new version, refine it even more until then, and see then how the media reacts. Now they can only focus on that feature rather than the entire package. Like, that is natural for everything in tech.
In the US at first. The new version of Siri, the one that's advertised everywhere, plastered on advertisements for iPhone 16, and was part of Apple's adorable marketing campaign, that version will not be on your iPhone until next year. Yeah, this is just the latest entry into a serious problem growing in Apple.
No, it's not something growing at Apple. It has always been there when necessary. Like, Apple has always had some issues, like the iPhone 4. Do I need to remind you of? You're holding it wrong. That was a hardware issue. And for some reason, you're might I remind you that the iPhone 7 Plus showed off its portrait mode feature as a defining feature of the hardware, but that one that launched a month or two later in a similar timeline to Apple Intelligence. Like, do I need to remind you that iOS 11 was so buggy in a way that iOS 12 was then like shoehorned in as a refinement release? And that one was so not unique that we had that in the past with macOS Snow Leopard, which was a refined version of Leopard, and that was far before Steve died, far before Steve went hands off. So there have always been issues. There are issues at Apple, there are issues at Google, issues at Microsoft, issues at Samsung. The question is, are those issues actually amplified? Are those issues actually increasing? Or is just the media coverage so obsessed with finding every little problem? I've seen like a ton of reports on Twitter that like, oh, I have this bug on iOS. Here's my phone randomly restarting. And somehow it isn't the mainstream issue. Somehow it's just your device. No, there's a ton of fake shit out there, unfortunately, too. You cannot get consumed by it. Where's that video? I'll show it when I'm done with this, just
Releasing,
so you know.
sometimes only announcing features that are just not ready. I don't know, part of me wants to understand, like, maybe Apple just felt uncomfortable for the first time in a long time. The pressure from AI announcements raining down from every other major tech company was just too much. 2024 was the year of AI, and Apple didn't want to be caught with their pants down. So they rushed to announce 2025 features in 2024.
Which he says like it's such a bad thing, but in the gaming industry, for example, we have games being announced like 5 years before they actually come out.
Effectively zero plan. And the Apple I know wouldn't have cared.
That's not true. Apple has always cared about larger industry trends. And sometimes they were caught with their pants down for not following those trends. Like, this is so weird. Like, Apple always has been a little singular. That is absolutely correct. And they are less reactionary than other companies. But they were never gonna ignore a trend as big as this. They're literally at their highest valuation in company history as a stock. And the reason why they started really growing after, well, they've been growing for a bit, but why they got a nice bump from the summer on is because they started talking about AI.
Would have waited until they knew it was ready. Apple makes the hardware,
but it is close to ready. You're getting some features that will be ready in a month, more features that will be ready a month from there. Like, why not talk about it right now? All those features will come out, like most of the features that are being announced right now will come out in the first 6 months of release of this new iPhone.
the software to all work together. That's the pitch, right? That's supposedly why and how iPhone is better. But if Apple truly is a software company, like Steve said, how has it become such an afterthought? Yes, iOS 18 is finally customizable, just like you wanted. Kinda, but it's also bloated, unfinished.
Again, those are the videos that I'm actually mentioning. Like, it's hard. I tried replicating those bugs. I couldn't. I even like restarted the control center 1 billion times, swiping up and down, up and down, up and down, till my finger was almost bloody. It didn't even do that, like, restart.
Broken. Unfortunately, the real truth is
that is the result of being permanently online. You stop focusing on the issues you might actually have on your device, and your mind starts playing tricks on you, imagining, oh, what are all the issues that other people might have, because some asshole TikToker showed a video that is absolutely not like aligning with like look, I know there are some issues on iOS 18, iOS 18.1, iOS 18.0.1 is coming out to fix some of them, but they are not unique. They're not different to issues that iOS 17, iOS 16, iOS 15 had.
and
They're not different to the issues that Android 14 had at release, 13, 12, 11, 10.
Take nothing else away from this video, take this with you. With the way things are right now, it doesn't matter which iPhone you buy, how fast or how pro. When they're all running the same software that the world's largest tech company let slip. Wow, we're all so busy arguing over things like
I don't even know what to say to this. At this point, he is working backwards from the conclusion. He didn't create an actual intellectually honest argument and what exactly is so wrong with iOS 18. He said things like it's customizable like you wanted to, kinda. Didn't then elaborate on that.
base model not having promotion or saying that this is just an S year, worrying that the newest release is boring compared to the heyday of the early 2010s, when phones like these were still new enough to make massive leaps forward year over year. The real problem is being totally ignored, and it can't afford to be ignored for much longer. Apple is...
Yeah, okay, so this is the final statement that I'm willing to hear. I fundamentally disagree that it's like, oh, it's a ticking time bomb. You cannot ignore this. Look, I'm a truthsayer. I'm pointing this out. The reason why is actually there is some historic precedent. Tailosive Tech, front page tech. Apple sheep reacts to Apple sucks. I don't even know if that video is still on. I don't think it is. And there's also Apple is BS now.
So you may realize that we've done 2 response videos in a row, but that's mostly because we've discovered responding to other YouTubers happens to be what you guys like enjoying the most, or don't like. Either way, we like getting people passionate about certain things, and this was the next YouTuber a lot of people were asking me to respond to and talk to. Now, before getting into the response
I'm not going to watch the entire video. I'm
reminders
just
for
going
everyone
to
out
give
there
you...
who doesn't get the point of me responding to other YouTubers. It is not because I hate them. It is not because I despise them. It's not because I'm trying
Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Drew, from 6 years ago. I absolutely agree. I do these reactions also not because I hate other YouTubers.
Cynical. I'm just trying to have a conversation, which is enjoyable to me. I still have massive respect for this YouTuber. I don't want them to die. I don't want to hurt them. I'm not trying to be salty. We're just seeing success in this type of genre, so we're trying out something different and seeing how you guys will like it. If you like it, don't like it, please just let us know. But without further ado, this is a video by Front Page Tech titled The Truth About Apple and iPhone 10. Apple sucks now, and it's your fault. Seeing that title, I was like, oh, this I have to be into if it's my fault. This is being taken.
So if you ever thought that Front Page Tech has like a very unique like take right now on iOS 18, that they've always been happy with Apple and iOS and whatever, and only now are they somewhat disgruntled, now I recommend you look at this.
Taken personally. So let's go forward with it.
Apple sucks now. And before all you Apple fanboys say, you don't know what you're talking about, you're just so biased towards Android.
This was, by the way, a failed like rebranding of the FPT channel, where I don't even know, maybe it was a separate channel back then, like where they really tried to go away from focusing on Apple. That didn't work, not only because they started with talking about Apple, but that was also the thing that they were most good at. They were not really that great as an Android channel.
That's me right there. See, you could just put my face there, but I might comment that exact thing. Nah, we're good.
I've been reporting on tech for years now, and for a very long time, I was a die-hard Apple fan. Yes, I switched to Android. I currently use Android, but I only switched because I felt like I had to because iOS was so sloppy.
I really don't want
Oh,
more
you see,
people to keep
iOS
using
was
that.
so sloppy, but somehow it was so refined in the past. That past, that was, of course, 6-7 years ago, where he said that iOS was so sloppy. So when was iOS then not sloppy? In the iOS 4 days? In the iPhone OS days before it had cut, copy, and paste?
As an excuse. One of the most common rebuttals I've seen in the YouTube comments, at least on my videos, is I hate Apple now, or Apple sucks, and by the way, I own these Apple products. That's not a counterpoint. I get that you're trying to say that, you know, I've tried Apple products myself, but realize
It's also not an argument at all. Like, you can argue that, oh, I have these bad experiences, I have these Apple devices, and then you can argue that. But just saying Apple sucks now, iOS is less refined now, that, like, at that point, then you are just admitting that every piece of software out there is becoming less refined now, and now you're just an old man screaming at cloud.
two-way street, and it
That
doesn't
is
really
my
work.
favorite Drew, by the way. Like, I think those videos were, like, together with his Pixel Rant videos, not only are they lengthy in a good way, but they're actually very precise. He is very well spoken in a way that's still, like, very accessible. Like, I don't know, like, I understand, of course, he has to do news coverage. I do too. But, yeah, I wish he would do more of that.
Just because of the fact that I've bought and reviewed a Google Pixel doesn't make me any less biased against Google, and I don't try to hide that. I am very definitely biased against them, but buying and reviewing the product doesn't change that fact. Same with Samsung phones. I think they're good, but they're definitely not as good as my iPhone just because I bought and owned one. In fact, too, the Note 7 and the S8 doesn't change the fact that I'm biased against them. They don't run iOS. I like iOS. If you're biased against iOS, saying that you've owned an iPhone doesn't really change that.
So when I say Apple sucks now, I'm literally comparing today's version of Apple to Apple from years ago. I've always set them a much higher standard than everybody else, and that's not my fault. That's because they set the standard.
Yeah, so I mean, like, so he said at the end of the iPhone 16 video that, like, oh, this is a problem that cannot longer be ignored. I know he will claim that maybe iOS 12 did like a restart on iOS refinement or something like that. I believe he came back like with iPhone 12 or something, or even before that actually, to Apple. But yeah, those are such meaningless statements. If you cannot articulate them, his videos are a lot prettier now, but his articulation skills in that regard.
And now every year they become more and more disappointing. It's like a really, really great TV show that has always been good, and we
By the
all
way,
love it,
he's
but now
saying
on
that simultaneously with the launch of the iPhone 10, one of the biggest changes in iPhone history.
Season 9, and it's kind of rough, and the writers are getting really, really lazy, but we're all afraid to admit that it's bad now.
If he's referring to The Office Season 9, then I agree. But in regards to Apple setting the standard, we as a culture kind of decide that. Most people buy Apple products.
True.
That's why most people consider Apple the standard. No, that is not just on you, but I kind of want to make sure we all realize Apple is not the ones deciding that they are the standard. If everyone started buying some other brand, then that would be the standard. We as a culture have decided that. But I think me and him probably agree on that.
None of the tech reviewers or tech experts tell you the truth anymore. They drool over anything new and fancy. Do you know why?
And this is where I hate reactionary bullshit. You guys see how when I criticize the likes of MKBHD, SuperSaf, Mr. Was the Boss, I never say, oh, they're just trying to sell you stuff. Oh, they're just trying to appease the big companies. No, I actually address the individual points. I will call them sometimes lazy on an individual basis when I see that a part of a review is falling short, that there aren't enough details there, that there was clearly not enough even personal interaction with the device. A problem I have with Linus Tech Tips, for example, who has recently discovered the also new action button user interface on iOS 18 for the iPhone 16. Mind you, that guy supposedly reviewed the iPhone 15 Pro that already had the action button with the exact same of user interface inside the settings app.
Because you drool over it, and it gets them views.
I recently had a collaboration with Painfully Honest Tech, and we kind of brought up this point that tech reviewers, no matter your opinion on Apple, you can only win. Whether you hate
Right.
Apple,
I think the other video is actually against Painfully Honest Tech, who then also went back to reviewing Apple. So yeah, you can take it as you will. We are about 2.5 hours into the stream. I wanted to say thank you to anybody who joined. I will obviously not watching this entire video. I just wanted to show you this to make you understand. Sometimes some people have some preconceived notion. Those notions might even pop up again and again, even though like the situation on the ground like proves them wrong again and again and again. It's a little bit like trickle down economics, where you can say it every time and it can sort of feel okay. Sometimes you might even get a piece of data that sort of corroborates that. But whenever you look at long-term trends, you will always find that very aggressive trickle down economics don't actually benefit the middle class. They don't benefit your economy as a whole. And I feel like Apple sucks now is kind of in the same realm, where there's a little bit of truthiness to that all of the time. But whenever you actually analyze long-term trends, you'll probably find that it's significantly less true than you think it is. With that, I would like to wrap up this video. Again, thank you so much to anybody who joined. I'll try to be on a more regular schedule, of course. I'm not traveling away all the time, though I will be away a lot in the second half of the month. However, I will be taking not all my equipment with me, but I will be buying a new micro USB to USB-C cable or adapter to make my microphone work at my mom's place, because I actually have the second half of the month kind of off, and so I'm going there and actually taking care of the cat and meeting some childhood friends. Yeah, so I'll let you know about the schedule. I guess those weren't details that you're interested in. Thank you so much for tuning in again. As always, if you're watching this, you enjoyed the content, please consider subscribing, liking the video, sharing it out to anybody who you think might enjoy it. Whenever you catch me live, chat with me. I love me a lively live chat, as I say, and you can also leave a super chat or super sticker in that live chat. Of course, beyond that, you can also become a channel member right here on YouTube or a supporter over on Patreon. And beyond all that, let me always know what you would like to see me cover next. Follow me on Twitter to actually interact with me there. This is where I get some breaking news. Armored Core saying thanks for the great stream. Thank you so much for joining. And I'll see you guys next time. And I will let you, of course, know when the next time is happening. Thank you so much. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.